Hello there, welcome or welcome back to my channel, or if you're here, hi, my name is Samantha and this is my channel where I talk all about books. Anyway, today I'm coming to you with my June wrap-up. So we're going to be talking about all of the books that I read in June, which actually turned out to be a lot of books, which is very weird because I started off like on the verge of a reading slump in June. I was just not really enjoying any of the books that I was reading and I didn't really know what to pick up. I was literally on the verge of just saying, you know what, screw it. I'm just gonna forget about reading and just play some games on the Switch. I didn't, because I then watched a video from Noelle, from Noelle 7 Pages, and it was her announcement video for the Tarot Readathon, which she was hosting with Deja from Deja's Book World, and also a bunch of other hosts, but Deja and Noelle were the ones who created the readathon. And yeah, I watched Noelle's video and I was like, oh, this actually sounds fun. It was actually 11 days into the readathon, so I kind of thought, is there any point in taking part? But I was like, you know what? No, I'm ambitious, so I'm gonna do it. And yeah, that readathon really saved me from a reading slump in June, because I ended up reading 6 books for the readathon, and I ended up reading 12 books overall in the month. Although I actually only finished 9 books, and I did have 3 DNFs. Even so, 9 books is plenty for a month where I literally thought I was going to a reading slump, and I didn't really feel like reading anything. To then have 9 books to talk about at the end of the month, that's pretty good. I'm very proud of myself. So I'm very grateful to Noelle and Deja for hosting that readathon, because not only was it a lot of fun, but it also saved me from a reading slump. And now I am in such a reading mood. Like, I just want to be reading all the time. I also did get sick at the end of June, so apologies for my voice, because I'm still recovering and I'm sounding very croaky and nasally, and it's not, I know it's not a nice sound, but I didn't want to wait ages to film this. But anyway, I've been rambling for too long already. The last thing I will say before we get into the books is that I did post 2 reading vlogs for the readathon, so if you're interested in checking them out, I'll link them up in the card. But yes, let's get into the books before I talk about other random crap that you don't care about. So if you didn't know, I actually do my wrap-ups in like a ranking style from worst to best. I just feel like it's the nicest thing to work up to like my favorite books of the month and just kind of get the trash out of the way early on. So yeah, I'm going to start off with the books that I DNF'd, which if you didn't know stands for did not finish. So these are books where I gave them a good shot and I was just like, you know what? Nah, that's not for me. So the first one on my list is the worst one, and that is The Friend Zone by Abby Jimenez. I read the second book in this series. This is a romance series, and so I always think it doesn't really matter that much because you know what's going to happen at the end of book 1 anyway, so it's not a huge deal if you just jump into the second book first. So I read the second book, which is the Happy Ever After playlist, in February for my romance reading vlog, actually, which I'll also link up in the card. I really enjoyed that one. I liked the fact that it was a more like hard-hitting romance, like it had some really difficult themes in it, so I really enjoyed that. But I also liked the romance and the characters, and yeah, I just overall really enjoyed that book. I think I gave 4 stars. This book, however, it was not for me. Ever since reading the Happy Ever After playlist, I knew I wanted to go back and read The Friend Zone, and yeah, I did not want to read The Friend Zone because I started reading this. I think this one is the one that I read the least of. I think I only read 80 pages before giving up because I hated it so much. And this book basically follows our 2 main characters, Kristen and Josh, and they are the best man and maid of honor for their friends, Sloane and Brandon. Anyway, and Sloane is our main character in the second book, and they meet and they don't really like each other in the beginning, but then they kind of become friends. But Kristen is determined to keep Josh in the friend zone because she knows that he wants kids and that's something that she is not going to be able to give to him. And yeah, she's just like, no, I don't think so. So she's trying to keep him in the friend zone. But what doesn't really make sense is that she actually is already in a relationship. She has a boyfriend, but he's in the army, so she doesn't really see him a lot. And there's cheating in this book. Like, there's 100% cheating. And I just thought it was really stupid. I thought that aspect was so stupid because it's like, just break up. There's no point in this at all. It doesn't add anything to the story. It just makes me think you're a shitty person. Anyway, so I didn't like that. And then Kristen was very much giving vibes of like, I'm not like other girls. And Josh was really putting other women down to make Kristen look better. And it was just like, all in all, garbage. And then I read a bunch of reviews which said that the way that infertility was handled was so bad. And yeah, overall I was just like, you know what? I don't think I'm gonna like this book. So I just decided to stop reading it 80 pages in. And I'm so glad I did because yeah, it sounded like it was gonna be awful and I really was not enjoying it at that point. So yeah, that was quite disappointing because I really enjoyed the Happy Ever After playlist. But what can you do? The next book that I did not finish was one of the ones that I was actually reading for the Tarot Readathon, and I actually kind of thought I might DNF this book just because like the actual challenge was read a book that you never thought you were going to read. And so I picked up Grown Ups by Marianne Keyes, which I just didn't think I would ever read anything by Marianne Keyes because I don't know, she's just not an author I really gravitated towards. Like I don't know. It just seems like, you know, there are certain books which is like, it's kind of like the vibe of like your aunt would read that and tell you, oh, it's such an amazing book, and then you read it and you're kind of like, that really wasn't that great, but you kind of feel like you have to be nice about it because your aunt recommended it. Like, that's the vibe that Marianne Keyes gives me. Anyway, this book is about this Irish family, and they're basically three brothers, and they're all married or in some sort of relationship, and there are lots of kitties around, and there are just loads of characters. Anyway, there are also like lots of secrets, even though the family is very close-knit, and one day, one of the brothers' wives has an accident and is concussed, and it basically means that she just starts talking like with no filter and just spilling all of these secrets and all this information that shouldn't have been shared. Anyway, I didn't actually really get to that part because I think I read like 130 pages of this. Like, it was a pretty decent chunk. However, this book is 600 pages, and I just don't think that it needs to be 600 pages. I don't think any contemporary book needs to be 600 pages necessarily. And yeah, I just wasn't really vibing with any of the characters. There were way too many to keep track of, and I just straight up didn't like it. I was also listening to the audiobook, which is narrated by Marianne Keyes herself, and I didn't think it was very good. Sorry, I feel like that's so mean, but like, yeah, I just straight up was not enjoying it. I just thought like the problems that these people had were not problems that I was really interested in. I DNF'd it at page 130 something, and I will be unhauling this. The only reason I actually have this is because we were getting rid of it at the library, and I read the description. I thought, okay, that kind of sounds fun. It's just not for me. The last DNF that I have, don't worry, we are gonna quickly get into books that I did actually finish. Anyway, the last DNF that I had was called The Plus One by Maisie Eddings, I think. This author also wrote, I want to say it's called A Brush with Love. This is the third book in a romance series as well. But again, like I said, I don't really care because I think it's so obvious what's going to happen in the other books in the series. Like, the only really spoilers you're going to get are like which couples got together, but you already know, so it doesn't matter. I cannot for the life of me remember the character names. All I remember is that it was these two characters who kind of hated each other when they were kids. Like, the woman's brother is getting married. The love interest is the brother's best friend from childhood, and he was kind of like always around when they were growing up. Yeah, they always hated each other. But they're now both going to this wedding, and the main character just had a messy breakup, but the guy that she was dating is also part of the wedding. So basically she and the love interest decide to kind of fake date and be each other's plus one for this wedding. And obviously they're going to develop feelings for each other, but I just really did not vibe with the writing style. I don't know, it just felt very weird to me. I think it's because it was written in third person. I've realized that I really don't particularly like romance books that are written in third person. I don't know why, but I just feel like I really struggle to connect to it, and it's just weird to me. I feel like first person works so much better for a romance. That being said, like, I'm sure that there are romance books that I've enjoyed that are written in third person, but yeah, this particular one just was not working for me. Yeah, I read like probably a third of it as well, and I just was not enjoying it at all. I didn't really feel any chemistry between the characters, and I borrowed this one from the library, so I was like, there's no harm in me DNFing this because it's not like I wasted my money on it. So yeah, I DNF'd that one as well. Anyway, so yeah, those were my 3 DNFs of the month, and hopefully we don't have any more anytime soon because I've had a lot of DNFs this year already. Now we're gonna move on to some 2-star reads. So we're still kind of negative, but don't worry, we'll get positive at some point. So these are actually both nonfiction books. The first one that I've got is this one called Eat That Frog. This is all about productivity. I thought it was going to be like a guide on how to stop procrastinating, because something you should know about me is I am pretty bad about procrastinating. Not in a work environment, because I feel like that's different. I'm a very motivated worker, but in my own personal life, I tend to procrastinate a lot of things. Anyway, and the whole concept of Eat That Frog is, if the hardest thing you're gonna do in the day is eat that frog, then you should actually just get that over and done with. And so that's kind of the philosophy of this book, is just do the most difficult task first, and then everything else will be easier. I didn't really like this. This is very much geared towards people who have a job where you are able to like work your way up the ladder, which is not my personal job. It wasn't really focusing on like personal productivity, more so in the workplace. And I also thought it was very toxic. Like, I think that that's a term that people use, like toxic productivity, where it kind of preached that like you should be busy all the time, like no rest, socializing in the workplace, advice, like that's unnecessary. You're not going to succeed in your career if you're spending your time talking with your colleagues at the water fountain or whatever. It was very much kind of preaching an antisocial sort of vibe, which I didn't really appreciate, and I thought it was a bit toxic. I also thought it was very repetitive because it was like 21 tips, but a lot of the tips just seemed like the same tip but reworded a little bit. So yeah, wouldn't really recommend that one necessarily. The next one that I have is a book called Animal Languages by Eva Major. I don't know how you say her last name because she's Dutch. I picked this book up on a whim from the library because I love language and I love animals. So I was like, well, this sounds interesting, learning about how animals communicate with each other. But it wasn't just talking about how animals communicate with each other, but also animals learning to speak human languages, which could have been really interesting. I just feel like this book was really weirdly structured. It bounced around so much between different animals. It just really felt like it wasn't very cohesive, and I think it was trying to cover too many animals, and it would have made more sense to focus more closely on a few animals or just like group it better. I don't know. It was just not structured very well, and yeah, I really did not like this particularly in the end. I ended up skimming a lot of it actually. I almost DNF'd it, but then I was like, no, I want to finish this, but I'm gonna skim some of it. It just was really boring as well. So I did not like that. Okay, so now we're moving on to some 3-star reads. Again, I've got 2 3-star reads, although one was actually 3.5, but anyway. So the first of those is The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. I've been meaning to read a book by Mitch Albom for a while because Mel from the Bookish Mel, who is like my booktube bestie, she really loves Tuesdays with Morrie. And I think also I was watching one of her videos and she was talking about how there's now a sequel to The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, and she had just read that. Anyway, so I was like, okay, this sounds good. I'll check that out. It's about this guy called Eddie, and basically at the beginning of the book, Eddie dies and he goes to heaven, and it's all about his journey through heaven, meeting these 5 different people. It's all about like the impact that they had on his life or that he had on their lives. It's just a very like philosophical sort of read. I thought this book was fine. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I mean, obviously that's why I gave it 3 stars. It just didn't really impact me in any way. I will say that there was a bit where Eddie was in the army and it's quite gory in that particular section, and I'm very squeamish, so I did not enjoy that part at all. I don't know, it was just fine. Like I think I was expecting to love it, but I just didn't. Moving on, the next book that I have to talk about is one that I already talked about in a reading vlog. That was my 9-year on booktube reading vlog where I reread books that I used to love when I started my channel to see if they still held up. Spoiler, they didn't, but one of the books that I read was The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I only reread this for that video and I thought it was okay. I gave it 3.5 stars actually. It definitely made me feel things, but I do think that the characters are ridiculously pretentious, and I don't think it's a perfect book by any stretch of the imagination, but it was still enjoyable. However, I do think I'm gonna get rid of it now because I just know that I'm not gonna reread it again. It was good, but it wasn't amazing, and yeah. If you want to hear more of my thoughts, I'll link the video up in the card. I don't want to go on and on about this because I have already talked about it in that vlog. So yeah, it was alright. I gave it 3.5 stars. Okay, and now we're moving into like the good books that I read in June. The next book that I read was City of Lost Souls by Cassandra Clare. This was a reread for me. This is the 5th book in the Mortal Instruments series, and I started rereading this series last year for the Shadowhunter read-along that was being hosted. I don't know if it's still going on, but I started rereading the series last year, and for some reason, the 5th book is always where I drop off with my reread. I think I've read all the other books in the series 3 times, and that was my first time ever rereading City of Lost Souls. I don't know why. I think it's partially because I don't own that one. I own the rest of the series. I'm just missing City of Lost Souls, and I still haven't gone out and bought it. I actually ended up listening to this book on audio because I did actually plan to like switch between audio and physical, and I got both books out from the library. But the app, which the audiobook was on, is really annoying. It doesn't actually like separate it into chapters. It just separates it into tracks. A track wouldn't necessarily be a chapter. Anyway, so it was just difficult to keep track of my place in the book. So I listened to the audiobook of this. That's a very roundabout way of saying I just listened to the audiobook. But if you don't know, the Mortal Instruments series basically follows this group of people called Shadowhunters, which are basically demon fighters, and they have like angel blood, and it's their mission in the world to kill all of the demons and protect humanity. And there are also warlocks and fairies and werewolves and vampires. It's just a very fun YA urban fantasy series, which I'm sure you do know about because it's been around forever. And I think Chain of Thorns just came out fairly recently, which is the last book in the, I don't know what it's called. I have no idea what that series is called. The Last Hours? Is that what it's called? I'm so far behind. I still haven't read the first book in that, which is Chain of Gold. I had to look at it on my shelf because I was like, I don't know the name of this. Yeah, Chain of Gold. I still haven't read that book. I'm gonna reread City of Heavenly Fire, and then I'm finally gonna read Chain of Gold. Anyway, I'm sure you already know what it's all about. I really like this series and I still really like it, so that's great. However, I think the last time I read City of Lost Souls, I gave it 5 stars, and this time it was definitely a 4-star. It was good, I enjoyed it, but I feel like it gave similar vibes to City of Fallen Angels, but it wasn't quite as slow as City of Fallen Angels, but it was not my favorite, but I still really enjoyed it, and I'm very excited for City of Heavenly Fire at some point. Anyway, the next book that I read is actually a poetry collection. I read a poetry collection called Artemis Made Me Do It by Tristan Attier. This is the second book in a poetry series, although obviously it doesn't really matter if you read them out of order. But the first one is called Aphrodite Made Me Do It, and I read this in 2020 and I loved it. I really enjoyed this one because it's basically like the poet is sort of writing to Aphrodite and Aphrodite's kind of responding, and this was the same sort of format except with Artemis, and I just really loved that format. But I ended up giving this one 4 stars instead of 5 stars like Aphrodite Made Me Do It, because I feel like the poems in Aphrodite Made Me Do It really resonated with me a lot, and these ones resonated less so. But I still really loved it, and I really want to buy the whole series because the covers are gorgeous. And there's actually going to be a 3rd collection which is coming out later this year called Persephone Made Me Do It, and yeah, I cannot wait for that. I really enjoyed it, and it reminded me that I should really read more poetry because I really love it. But yeah, I really liked this one a lot, and I would highly recommend it if you are interested in reading poetry. The next book that I'm going to talk about is a crime book, an incredibly popular one, and that is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I randomly picked this up back when my reading slump was starting, and I was like, I don't really know what to read. Maybe if I read a crime book, it will be fun, and I thought this one was going to be very fun, and it definitely was. Anyway, it just so happened to overlap with one of the prompts for the tarot readathon, so that was perfect. But yes, I actually started it before I decided to participate in the readathon. If somehow you do not know what this book is about, this book basically follows this group of elderly people living in a retirement village, and once a week on Thursdays they meet to discuss old murder cases and try and solve them. And then one day a murder happens to somebody that they know, and so they're trying to kind of work out what happened, who did it, and they're kind of like talking to the police about it and trying to get all these details which they shouldn't have access to, and it's just a lot of fun. You definitely have to suspend disbelief because like I don't think that would ever happen, but that's fine. I'm not here to criticize how realistic it is. But yeah, I thought that this was so much fun. I really enjoyed my time reading it. However, I do not think that it deserves as much hype as it has got. Like, I feel like everyone talks about this as if it is the best book ever written, and it was definitely enjoyable. I had a really fun time with it, but I don't think it's like the best thing that's ever been written, and I don't think it's gonna stick with me forever. Like, I don't understand why people love it as much as they do, but I did have a good time with it. The next book that I read was another one for the readathon, and that was The Wind Knows My Name by Isabel Allende. I said this in my vlog, but I basically studied some stories by Isabel Allende in university, and I have been meaning to read one of her novels for the longest time, but I just never got around to it. And then I got this prompt to read a book with magical realism, and I know that Isabel Allende's books often have magical realism in them, so I was like, okay, I'll pick up this book because it's also her newest release. I thought it sounded really good, and it was really good. It basically has 2 timelines. So the first timeline is following this young boy called Samuel, and he ends up having to flee Nazi-occupied Vienna in the 1930s, and he ends up coming to England, and he's all alone without his parents, and it kind of follows his childhood and his life. And then we also have a perspective in 2019 following this young girl called Anita. She and her mother have entered the US illegally, and they end up getting separated, and Anita is sort of bounced around between foster homes, and so we get to learn all about her case because she's got a social worker and a lawyer trying to track down her mother so that they can get them the right to stay in the US and obviously to reunite them. And we also get the backstory of a few other characters like her social worker, and Anita is from El Salvador originally, so we also get the perspective of another woman who had to flee El Salvador when she was a young girl and came to the US. I feel like Isabel Allende did such an amazing job of making these characters feel very real and very fleshed out. Like, I feel like we really understood the characters well. And the book was only 250 pages, and I feel like she packed a lot into those 250 pages, and it was just very well done. And I thought it was really interesting seeing the stories intertwine, and also sort of how the stories mirrored themselves a bit, even though it had been, you know, such a long time period and also two very different situations. It was really well done. I really enjoyed this one. The only thing that I didn't love was that I thought that the ending was just a little bit rushed. It could have been even just 10 pages longer, and I think I would have enjoyed it more. However, I definitely still think that this book is worth a read, and I really loved her writing style, and I will definitely be picking up more books by her in the future. Anyway, and the last book that I have to talk about, finally, we're at the end, is my favorite book of the month, and that was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I finally read this book. I think I'm the last person to read this book, but I'm so glad that I finally did. And I'm also very glad that I waited until now, because I actually tried to read this book in April. I got the ebook from my library and I started reading it, and I just was not in the mood for it. And I'm so glad that I didn't just read it anyway, because I really feel like you need to be in the perfect mood to read this book. If you're not in the mood for something very cozy with no plot, then you're not gonna like it. But yeah, if somehow you don't know, this book basically follows our main character, Viv, who is an orc, and she used to go on all of these sort of quests and kill lots of people or creatures or whatever. And yeah, she used to go gallivanting around the land, but she's reached a stage in her life where she is absolutely sick of that, and she wants to settle down and open a coffee shop, because in this world, coffee isn't really a known thing. So she decides to settle in one place and open a coffee shop. And I think on the cover it says high fantasy, low stakes, which is obviously exactly what it is. We have these fantastical characters, but it's really just a book about like the day-to-day running of a coffee shop, and it is just so cozy and warm and comforting. Like, it is just a beautiful book if you're in the mood for something very cozy and just calm and relaxing. Yeah, I absolutely loved this. Although I will say this book talks about cinnamon rolls a lot, so don't read it if you don't want to eat cinnamon rolls, because after reading it you will want to make cinnamon rolls, which I did because I just couldn't stop thinking about them. I really loved this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I'm keeping it at 4.5 for now because I typically only give 5 stars to like absolute favorites, but I'm gonna let it sit with me, and that could change to a full 5, but 4.5 is still the highest rated book I've had in a little while. So yeah, I really loved this one, and I'm sure you've already read it, but if you haven't, check it out. But anyway, those were all of the 12 books that I read or DNF'd in the month of June. I've got big plans for July in terms of reading. I've got a lot of good books on my tentative TBR, like my TBR in my mind, because I don't actually share my TBR. But yes, I've got a lot of good books on my radar for this month. I'm very excited about them. So yes, hopefully July's wrap up will be lots of fun. But anyway, that is all that I have for this video. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe down below. And please let me know what books you read in June. I would love to know. And also, if you made it to the end, could you leave me a coffee emoji for Legends and Lattes? That is all that I have for this video. So I'll see you very soon with another one. Bye!
You in the backyard of your old farm in the summer. Stayed there for 3 weeks where we learned to love each other. Wrote you letters, sent a message to the that day. Skip to the present.